Alara was 24 years old when her world was reduced to the contents of a single canvas satchel and the weight of a brass sextant in her hand. The house she had grown up in, a place that smelled of pine resin, sawdust, and the faint, sweet aroma of her father's pipe tobacco, was no longer hers. The air now tasted only of stale dust and finality. Her father, a master shipwright and a man who could find his way by the stars or the subtle lean of a coastal cypress, had been gone for 2 years, lost to a sudden squall that had paid no mind to his expertise. His brother, her uncle Marcus, had inherited the business, the house, and, by extension, her. She did not cry. She did not plead. When her uncle had called her into the study, the one her father had built with his own hands, with its dovetailed bookshelves and compass, rose inlaid in the floor, she had felt a profound and hollow calm settle over her. Marcus was not a cruel man, not in the active sense. He was merely a man of ledgers and bottom lines, a man for whom a niece who knew more about the proper seasoning of oak for a keel than she did about managing a household was an anomaly, an unprofitable asset to be liquidated. "The business is being consolidated," he had said, not looking at her, his fingers fussing with a stack of crisp papers. "The coastal properties are being sold. This house is among them." He slid an envelope across the polished surface of the desk. "This is a final settlement. It should be sufficient for you to find a new arrangement." The quiet expulsion was administrative, bloodless. She was a line item, a loose end to be tied off. She took the envelope without a word. Inside was a paltry sum, an amount that was an insult disguised as charity. It was enough to last a month, perhaps 2 if she was frugal to the point of starvation. It was not enough for a new life, but it was enough for a departure. She spent the last day walking through the empty rooms of her memory. Her father had taught her everything, not with lectures, but with inclusion. He had placed a small, perfectly balanced hammer in her hand when she was 6. He had shown her how to read the grain of a piece of wood, to know its strengths and secrets. He taught her the mathematics of naval architecture, the steady art of masonry for building sea walls, the patient skill of the blacksmith for forging custom fittings. He taught her that competence was a fortress, a shelter no storm could breach. "Know how to make, and you will never be unmade," he used to say, his voice a low rumble like the tide turning. Her most prized possession, the only thing she truly claimed from the house, was his mariner's sextant. It was a beautiful instrument of heavy, lacquered brass, its vernier scale and mirrors precise to a fraction of a degree. It was not just a tool for navigation. It was a symbol, a way to find true north when all else was lost, a reminder that even in the vast, indifferent emptiness of the sea or the sky, there were constants. There was a way to find your position. She packed it carefully in her satchel, wrapped in an oilcloth map of the coastline. Alongside it went a small adze, a set of wood chisels, a sharpening stone, and a thick woolen blanket. The rest she left behind. She left at dawn the next day, without looking back. She did not know where she was going, only that she was heading north, along the coast, away from the familiar harbors and into the harsher, less forgiving territories, where the land grew rocky and the towns grew sparse. She walked for 3 days, the straps of the satchel biting into her shoulders, the rhythm of her footsteps a steady, somber drumbeat. She ate dried fish and hard bread, drank from cold streams, and slept, rolled in her blanket under the vast, silent audience of the stars. With each step, the hollow calm within her began to solidify, hardening into a quiet, unyielding resolve. She was her father's daughter. She knew how to make. She would not be unmade. On the 4th day, seeking shelter from a biting wind in the lee of a public house in a forgotten, wind-scoured port town called Salt End, she overheard a conversation. 2 old fishermen, their faces nets of wrinkles, were laughing over mugs of ale. "Heard they finally put the old griffin's tooth up for tax auction," one said, his voice raspy. "Clerk's asking 50 crowns for the deed. 50 crowns for a pile of rocks and a ghost." The other chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling in a pail. "More fool anyone who pays it. Thing's been derelict 60 years. Cursed, they say. Last keeper, Silas Blackwood, threw himself from the top during the great storm of '88. Took the light with him. They say he still walks the gallery on moonless nights, mourning his lost love." "No love lost for him," the first countered. "He was a bitter old hermit. Built the thing himself and trusted no one. The shipping company that hired him went bust, and he never saw a penny for his work. Drove him mad, they say. No, the real curse is the sea. That point has claimed a dozen ships since the light went out." Alara listened, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of water. 50 crowns. She felt inside her coat. The envelope from her uncle contained 60. A pile of rocks and a ghost. A place no one wanted. A place that needed to be made whole again. A flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope sparked in the cold emptiness of her chest. It was a desperate, foolish idea, a purchase born of having no other options. But the words of the fisherman echoed her father's philosophy. A thing that is broken can be fixed. The county clerk's office was a small, dusty room smelling of dry paper and apathy. The clerk himself was a thin man with a perpetually unimpressed expression. When Alara asked about the Griffin's Tooth lighthouse, he smirked. "You're the first person to ask about that folly in a decade," he said, pulling a yellowed deed from a mildewed file box. "It's 50 crowns. Sold as is, where is. No guarantees of structural integrity, access, or freedom from spectral tenants." He winked, a gesture that held no warmth. He saw a young, desperate woman about to throw away her last coins on a ruin. "I'll take it," Alara said, her voice steady. She counted out the 50 silver crowns onto the dusty counter. The coins made a small, definitive sound in the quiet room. The clerk shrugged, stamped the deed with a heavy, final-sounding thud, and pushed it toward her. The transaction was complete. She was now the owner of a pile of rocks, a ghost, and a legend of failure. She walked out of the office, the deed in her hand feeling both impossibly light and unbearably heavy. She had 10 crowns left to her name, and a lighthouse to claim. The journey to the point took the rest of the day. The path dwindled from a wagon-rutted track to a barely there trail winding through gorse and sea-stunted pines. The wind grew stronger, carrying the constant, percussive roar of the surf. Finally, rounding a high bluff, she saw it, and her heart sank. It was worse than she had imagined. The Griffin's Tooth was not so much a lighthouse as a jagged spear of granite thrusting from the sea, connected to the mainland by a narrow, crumbling causeway that was awash with spray. The tower itself stood defiant against the gray sky, but it was a wounded defiance. Whole sections of the lower masonry were gone, scavenged by the relentless waves. The iron door hung from a single, rust-eaten hinge. The glass of the lantern gallery at the very top was a spiderweb of cracks and gaping holes. It was a monument to decay, a testament to the victory of the sea over the works of man. For a long, gut-wrenching moment, despair washed over her, cold and absolute. The clerk's mocking face swam in her vision. She had bought a tombstone. But then her gaze fell upon the stonework of the tower itself. Even through the damage, she could see the skill. The stones were not crudely stacked, but expertly fitted, each one shaped to lock with its neighbors. The courses were level, the lines true. This was not the work of a committee or a careless contractor. This was the work of one man's singular vision and immense talent. This Silas Blackwood, this bitter hermit, had been a master of his craft. He was a man her father would have respected. Taking a deep breath of the salt-laced air, Alara tightened her grip on her satchel and started across the treacherous causeway. The keeper's cottage, a small stone structure attached to the base of the tower, was a complete ruin, its roof long gone, its interior a mess of debris and sea wrack. But the tower itself, her tower, still stood, Inside, the air was thick with the smells of damp stone, rust, and the acidic tang of seabird droppings. A spiral staircase of cast iron clung to the curved wall, its steps coated in a slick, treacherous layer of corrosion and grime. Sunlight, thin and gray, lanced down from the broken lantern room high above, illuminating dancing motes of dust. It was a place of profound and desolate loneliness. She spent the first hours in a methodical assessment, her father's voice a quiet murmur in her mind. Start with what you have, find the strongest point, and build from there. The ground floor was untenable, exposed to the waves that crashed against the breached foundation. But halfway up the tower, there was a small room, likely a watchkeeper's post or a storage space. Its door was gone, but the stone floor was solid, and the walls were mostly intact. It was above the reach of the highest tides. This would be her shelter. She worked until dusk, clearing debris from that small room, sweeping it clean with a makeshift broom of gorse branches. She used stones from the ruined cottage to block the worst of the wind from the open doorway. It was a grim, cramped space, but it was hers. As darkness fell, she ate the last of her dried fish, huddled in her blanket, listening to the eternal dialogue of wind and water. She did not feel victorious. She felt like a tiny, fragile creature, clinging to the side of a cliff, but she was not falling, not yet. The next days fell into a rhythm of survival and labor. Her 10 remaining crowns bought her a sack of flour, a tin of lard, a bag of salt, and a small fishing net from the practical, sharp-eyed shopkeeper in Salt End, a woman named Elspeth, who gave her a long, measuring look, but asked no questions. Alara learned the tides. She learned where to cast her net for silver-sided fish, where to find mussels clinging to the rocks at low tide. She learned to forage for edible sea greens along the shoreline. Hunger was a constant, low hum, but she did not starve. Her real work was the tower. Every hour not spent securing food was spent on assessment and planning. She was a surveyor now, her father's sextant her primary tool. She used it not to measure the angle of stars, but the inclination of walls, the subtle sag of the iron staircase. She made a plumb bob from a fishing weight and a length of twine to check if the tower leaned. It did not. Silas Blackwood had built his foundation on bedrock. The core was sound. The work was monumental, overwhelming. It was not a task for one person. It was a task for a crew, for a generation. Yet she had only her own 2 hands. So she broke it down into the smallest possible components. 1 stone, 1 step, 1 day at a time. She began with the lower courses of the tower, the foundation that the sea was trying to reclaim. At low tide, she waded into the churning, knee-deep water, wrestling fallen blocks of granite back into place. She had no mortar, so she used a technique her father had described from ancient sea forts. She packed the gaps with smaller, carefully chosen stones, wedging them in with the flat of her adze until they were immovable. It was brutal, back-breaking labor. Her hands became a raw landscape of cuts and calluses. Her muscles ached with a fire that never fully went out. But with each stone she set, she felt a grim satisfaction. She was not just building a wall, she was pushing back the ocean. It was during this work, weeks into her solitary campaign, that she discovered the anomaly. While clearing rubble from the base of the interior wall, near the massive stone hearth that dominated the ground floor, she noticed it. One of the hearthstones, a huge, flat piece of slate, rang differently when her crowbar tapped against it. The others gave a dull, solid thud. This one produced a faint, hollow echo. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She ran her fingers over the edges of the stone. The mortar line was almost invisible, a perfect fit. But when she pressed hard, she felt a minute give. It was not set like the others. For the rest of the day, she worked with a frantic, focused energy. Using her chisels and the back of her adze, she painstakingly chipped away at the surrounding mortar, a fine gray powder dusting her face and arms. It was slow, delicate work, trying not to mar the stone. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long orange rays through the doorway, she was able to wedge the tip of her crowbar into a thin gap. She put her full weight on it. The stone groaned, scraped, and then tilted upwards, revealing a dark, square opening beneath. The air that rose from the cavity was cool and dry, smelling not of damp and decay, but of old leather and cold metal. Her hands trembling slightly, she lit a piece of fat-soaked rush, her makeshift candle, and lowered it into the darkness. The light flickered over the contents of a small, stone-lined chamber. There were 2 heavy, sea-worn wooden chests, bound in iron, and on top of one of them, a leather-bound logbook, its cover remarkably preserved. With a strength born of adrenaline, she heaved the chests, one by one, out of the hole. They were incredibly heavy. The first one she managed to pry open with her adze. The lid creaked, and she stared, breathless. It was filled to the brim with gold coins, not silver crowns, but heavy, gleaming gold sovereigns, stamped with the face of a long-dead king. It was a fortune, more money than she had ever seen, more than her uncle had sold her entire past for. It was enough to hire a crew, to buy the finest materials, to restore the lighthouse a dozen times over. But it was the second chest, and the logbook, that held the true treasure. The second chest did not contain coins. It held tools, a complete set of pristine masonry and carpentry tools, each one nestled in oiled leather. There were calipers, a flawless dovetail saw, levels with glass vials of clear, unclouded liquid. They were the tools of a master craftsman, preserved as if waiting for the right hands to find them. Her hands shaking, she opened the logbook. The first page was written in a strong, clear, angular script. To whomever finds this, know that you are standing in my life's work, my fortress, and my tomb. My name is Silas Blackwood. I was not a madman, nor a suicide. I was a builder who was betrayed. Ilara sat on the cold stone floor, the flickering rushlight casting dancing shadows around her, and she began to read. Silas's story unfolded, a parallel echo of her own, but on a grander scale. He had been a brilliant, self-taught engineer and mason, hired by a major shipping consortium to build a light on the most dangerous point on the coast. He designed it, quarried the stone himself, and built it almost single-handedly over the course of 5 years. It was to be his masterpiece. But as the project neared completion, his employers, facing financial ruin from a series of bad investments, conspired to cheat him. They declared bankruptcy, voiding his contract, and planned to take possession of the light without paying him the massive sum he was owed. Silas, discovering their treachery, acted first. On the day they were to arrive, he faked his death, sending a small boat out into a gathering storm. He then secreted away his payment, which he had already secured in gold, mistrusting their paper promises, and his finest tools, and sealed himself inside his creation. The world thought him dead, a tragic victim of the sea and his own madness. In reality, he lived on for another 20 years, a silent, solitary guardian, sustained by the sea and his own unbreakable will. His words were not filled with rage, but with a deep, resonant bitterness that had mellowed into a kind of stoic peace. He wrote of the sea, the stars, the satisfaction of a well-set stone. He wrote of his betrayal not as a tragedy, but as a liberation, a severing of ties with a corrupt world of men, allowing him to live a life of pure, honest communion with his craft and the elements. The final entry, dated decades ago, was addressed directly to her. If you have found this, it means my tower has chosen you. It means you have the grit to survive on this point, and the eye to see what is hidden. This fortune is yours. It is stolen wages, and I consider it returned to the hands of a worker, not a clerk. The tools are also yours. Use them. A craft is a legacy that cannot be stolen. My only request is this: light the lamp again. This coast is a graveyard of good ships and good men. The light was my penance and my pride. Let it shine again. Do not let my work be for nothing. Build your life here. Find the peace in the work that I did. You are not alone. The spirit of this place is now your kin." Tears, hot and sudden, finally fell. She did not cry for her loss, for her father, or for her lonely exile. She cried with a profound, aching sense of gratitude and kinship. She was not the inheritor of a ruin, but the chosen successor to a master. Silas Blackwood, the ghost of Griffin's Tooth, was not a specter to be feared. He was her benefactor, her spiritual mentor, a fellow craftsman who had reached across 60 years of silence to hand her a future. She was not alone. The discovery of Silas's cache changed everything. It was not just the money, it was the purpose. Light the lamp again. The command settled in her soul, a new true north. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a restorer, a keeper. With her newfound resources, the work accelerated, but her methods remained the same, deliberate, methodical, and respectful of the original craft. She traveled to the mainland, not as a desperate girl, but as a woman with a purpose. She purchased a small, sturdy dory for transport. She bought lumber, lime, sand, and ropes, and she sought out the town's blacksmith. Cale was a man built like the anvils he worked, with arms corded with muscle, and a face that seemed permanently fixed in a skeptical scowl. He looked her over, then at the rusted iron fittings she brought him from the lighthouse. "This is scrap," he grunted. "What do you need?" "I need them remade," Alara said. "Same dimensions, same design, but I need them forged from marine-grade wrought iron, not this cheap cast stuff. And I need them hot-dip galvanized." Cale's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. He had expected a request for a simple hook or hinge, not a lesson in metallurgy. He looked at her again, seeing not just a young woman, but someone who spoke his language. "That's a specialist job. Costs a pretty penny." "I can pay," she said simply, placing a gold sovereign on his workbench. The coin gleamed against the dark, soot-stained wood. Cale stared at the coin, then back at her. The scowl did not vanish, but its edges softened. "Where'd a slip of a girl learn about galvanization?" he asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to curious. "My father was a shipwright," she said. "He believed in doing a job once, and doing it right." A slow nod from the blacksmith. It was an answer he understood. He picked up one of the old fittings, weighing it in his hand. "All right," he said. "I'll do it. But I'm coming out to see this folly of yours. I don't do work for ghosts." Coyle's visit marked the beginning of her integration into the small, wary community of Saltend. He arrived in his own boat, expecting to find a delusional girl playing in a pile of rubble. He found Alara 50 feet up the side of the tower, suspended on a rope and plank scaffold, meticulously repointing the joints in the granite blocks with fresh lime mortar. He watched her work for a full 10 minutes, silent and unseen. He saw the precision of her movements, the economy of her effort, the respect she paid to each stone. He saw a fellow craftsperson. He did not offer charity. He offered a trade. "Your ironwork will take time," he called up to her. "I've a forge bellows that needs new leather, and the woodwork is rotten. I'll trade you hours. My forge for your joinery." It was the first crack in the wall of her solitude. Alara agreed. Soon others followed. Lena, a retired fisherwoman with eyes as gray and wise as the sea, showed her the hidden channels and eddies around the point, teaching her to read the water as she read a book. In return, Alara repaired the old woman's leaking roof. Elspeth, the shopkeeper, began setting aside the best provisions for her, extending credit without being asked, and in exchange, Alara rebuilt her storeroom shelves, stronger and truer than before. They were a community of competence. They did not pry into her past. They did not offer pity. They recognized the language of hard work and skill. They saw what she was doing. the impossible task she had set for herself, and they respected it. Her folly was slowly becoming a landmark of resilience, and she was becoming one of them. The greatest challenge was the lantern room. The massive, intricate Fresnel lens, a beehive of glass prisms designed to magnify and focus the light into a single, powerful beam, was intact but filthy, its brass framework tarnished and seized. The great lamp mechanism was a wreck of rusted iron and broken gears, and half of the curved glass panes of the gallery itself were gone, leaving the delicate lens exposed to the elements. This was a task that required all of her inherited knowledge. She spent weeks cleaning the lens, prism by prism, using a mixture of distilled rainwater and spirits, until it shone with its original, dazzling brilliance. It was an act of devotion. She studied Silas's logbook, where he had sketched the designs for the lamp mechanism. With Cale's help at the forge, she began to recreate the broken components, piece by painstaking piece. The curved glass panes were the final, seemingly insurmountable obstacle. No one made glass like that anymore. But Lena, the old fisherwoman, remembered a story about a ship that had foundered on the Griffon's Tooth a century ago, a ship carrying architectural supplies for a cathedral up the coast. She told Alara where the wreck lay, in a deep, sheltered cove. Using diving techniques her father had taught her for inspecting the hulls of ships, Alara spent a week searching the kelp forests in the icy water. And she found it. The wreck was mostly gone, but in the sandy bottom, miraculously preserved, were crates containing thick, curved panes of glass. They were not a perfect match, but with careful cutting and fitting, they would work. The day she installed the final pane of glass in the lantern room, sealing it against the wind and rain, was a quiet triumph. The tower was whole again. The structure was secure. The interior was clean and livable, and the heart of the lighthouse, the lens and the lamp, was ready. She had built a home from a ruin. Her final task was to light the lamp. She had converted Silas's original oil lamp to run on a more modern, reliable fuel. As dusk fell on the anniversary of her arrival, 1 year to the day, she climbed the spiral stairs for the last time as a restorer. She stood in the lantern room, the air still and expectant. Below, the sea churned, a dark, restless gray. She opened the fuel valve, struck a match, and the lamp ignited with a soft whoosh. A bright, steady flame bloomed within the magnificent lens. And then she engaged the clockwork mechanism she and Cale had so carefully rebuilt. With a series of satisfying clicks and whirs, the great lens began to turn. A single, powerful beam of pure white light swept out from the tower, cutting a brilliant path across the darkening water. It swept across the waves, illuminated the distant shore of Saltend, and continued its silent, reassuring circle. The Griffon's Tooth was alive again. Her life found its final, peaceful rhythm. She was the keeper of the light. Her days were spent maintaining the tower, fishing, and tending a small garden she had managed to cultivate in a patch of soil sheltered by the cottage walls. Her nights were spent in the watchroom, reading by the fire, the steady, sweeping beam of the lighthouse a constant, silent companion. The community of Saltend had accepted her as their own. Cale would bring her supplies and trade stories. Lena would sit with her and watch the seabirds. Ships passing in the night would dip their lights in salute to the resurrected beacon. One evening, a fierce autumn storm blew in, a gale that reminded the old-timers of the legendary storm of '88 that had supposedly claimed Silas Blackwood. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and waves of monstrous size crashed against the tower, sending spray clear over the top of the lantern room. Alara was not afraid. The tower stood firm, a testament to Silas's genius and her own tireless labor. She felt a profound sense of security, of being in the safest place in the world. Just after midnight, through the sheeting rain, she saw it, the flickering, desperate lights of a ship. Driven dangerously close to the rocks, its engines clearly failed. It was a fishing trawler from a southern port, lost in the storm and unaware of the treacherous reef that lay just beyond the point. Without her light, they would have been torn apart on the rocks within minutes. She kept the beam steady, its powerful ray a lifeline in the chaos. She could see the crew on the deck, fighting to drop anchor, their faces illuminated in brief flashes. The light gave them a reference point, a warning, a sliver of hope in the maelstrom. They managed to anchor just outside the breakers, holding their position through the worst of the storm, their vessel saved from certain destruction by the beam from the cursed tower. When the storm broke at dawn, the sea a roiling, exhausted gray, the crew of the trawler rowed ashore. Their captain, a man with a weary, grateful face, stood before her at the base of the tower. He said nothing for a long moment, simply staring up at the light, then at her. "We would have been lost," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Every soul. We owe you our lives." He did not know her story, but like Cale and Lena and Elspeth, he recognized competence. He recognized salvation. In the quiet years that followed, the Griffin's Tooth became a fixture, a symbol of the coast's resilience. Alara remained its keeper. The mocking clerk from the county office was long gone, his dismissal of her a forgotten footnote. Her Uncle Marcus's consolidated business had failed 2 years after he cast her out, a victim of his own cold calculus. She heard the news with a distant, detached sadness, not for him, but for the legacy he had so carelessly dismantled. Her home was a fortress of love and competence, built on the foundations of 2 separate but kindred legacies. On a small shelf in her living quarters, 2 objects sat side by side. One was her father's heavy brass sextant, polished and true, a tool for finding one's place in the world. The other was a small, exquisitely carved wooden seabird found at the bottom of Silas Blackwood's tool chest, its wings swept back as if in perpetual flight. They were the symbols of her twin inheritances, the skills to build and the purpose to do so. She had come to this desolate point with nothing but a satchel of tools and a heart full of cold grief. She had bought a ruin with a handful of coins born of insult. But she had discovered that true inheritance was not money or property, but knowledge, resilience, and the courage to face a monumental task, one stone at a time. She had found more than a fortune in the dust and rubble. She had found a purpose, a community, and a profound and unshakable peace. The 50 crowns she had spent on that worthless pile of rocks was, without a doubt, the best money she had ever spent.